Hi guys, so I signed chapter 29, A Changing World, from 1950 to the present. So today we're going to read lessons 1 and 2. Section 1, African nations face many challenges. Africa is a continent in change. As you know from chapter 22, the countries of Africa became European colonies in the 19th century. Chapter 28 explained how these colonies became independent nations after World War II. Ended in 1945. Today, many African economies are growing at an average rate of over 5%. These nations have made real progress towards democratic rule. Their people live with less violent conflict than they did 10 years ago. Conflict happens when people fight and do not agree. Trade is growing, and Africa is reconnecting with the world economy. How has rapid urbanization affected Africa? But Africa is a continent in crisis. One of its biggest problems is rapid urbanization. That is, Africa's cities are growing too quickly. Many people are leaving the countryside to find better life in the cities. Often they have no skills or education, so they cannot find jobs. This large number of migrant people who left one place to move to another puts a strain on city services. Often the city cannot provide transportation and sanitation. Many people live in slums with no electricity, running water, or sewers. A slum is an area of a city with too many people, poor housing, and low-income families. People have health problems, and only a few get to eat enough. Why does Africa have a lack of food? Famine is a big problem for Africa. Since the 1970s, many African people have starved to death. They do not have enough food to eat. Here's 5 things explain this lack of food. 1. Africa's population growth is greater than that of any other continent. 2. Since the 1970s, Africa has experienced several droughts. A drought is a long period without much rain. 3. Africa is growing less food because its farmers have little fertilizers, pesticides, and fuel. Fertilizer makes soil grow crops. Pesticides kills the bugs that eat the crops. 4. Many African countries pay more attention to industry than to farming. 5. In many parts of Africa, civil war has damaged farming. The nations of Africa and more powerful countries will have to work together to solve these many problems. Alright guys, that was lesson 1. We're going to move on to lesson 2. Yeah. Lesson 2. Yeah. The Middle East remains in conflict. The major countries in the Middle East do not seem to trust one another. Their main problem is the Palestine issue. You read about it in chapter 28. What were the results of the Middle East peace talks? The United States has encouraged Israel and its neighbors to settle their problems. In 1978, President Jimmy Carter brought together leaders from Egypt and Israel at a Camp David in Maryland. Their agreement formed the basis for an Arab-Israeli peace treaty. Prime Minister of Israel, Yasser Rabin, agreed to trade land for peace. Israel has also reached out to its other Arab neighbors, Jordan and Syria. In 1994, Jordan signed a peace treaty with Israel. However, Syria and Israel could not agree. This is partly because some Arabs oppose the peace process, and instead they support terrorist groups like Hamas. On the other side, some Israelis fear that a self-ruling Palestine will threaten the security of their country. In October 1998, the leaders of the Middle East met with the U.S. President Bill Clinton for 9 days. Israel agreed to withdraw from more Palestinian land. The Palestinians agreed to get rid of terrorism. The United States agreed to guarantee security. So how did the Shah of Iran help his country? Until 1979, the Shah, Iran's ruler, tried to make his country into a modern nation. He began new industry. He built schools, highways, and factories. He gave women more freedom. But many peasants still had no land of their own. Many people had no jobs. Also, the Ayatollahs, the rich leaders of Iran, thought that the Shah was destroying traditional values. The Shah had his secret police arrest anyone who did not like what he was doing. He became a cruel dictator. Many Iranians opposed him. Why did the Shah of Iran flee his country? In the late 1970s, many people began to support Ayatollah. He wanted religious leaders to rule Iran. In January 1979, these people forced the Shah to flee Iran. Then, Ayatollah's new government took over Iran. Much of the anger against the Shah was directed towards the United States. The United States gave aid to the Jewish people in Israel. The Iranians said the United States was the enemy of all Muslims. In 1979, the problem got worse. To show their hatred of the United States, some Iranians captured 52 Americans and made them hostages for almost 15 months. The Iranians held these people against their will. Eventually, the hostages were released. Get to the right page. Sorry, guys. Here you go. What caused a war between Iran and Iraq? Let's get to that. Looks like I don't have that page. I wonder why I didn't copy it. We'll leave it right here. Iran and Iraq were neighbors. Iranians are mainly Shiite Muslims. Iraqis are Sunni Muslims. Iranians are Persians. Iraqis are Arabs. Because of these differences, the two neighbors have a long history of conflict. After 1979, Iran tried to influence a large Shiite community in Iraq. This alarmed the Sunni Muslims who led the Iraqi government. In September 1980, Iraq troops invaded Iran. The war between the two countries lasted 8 years. It killed more than 1 million people. It also damaged the oil industry of both countries. The Iraqis had better weapons and they used poison gas. The Iranians, however, had larger army and better airplanes. Both sides attacked international shipping. Because of this, the United States sent ships to the area. They protected the shipping lanes through which ships transported much of the world's oil. In 1988, the United States helped end the war. Why did Iraq invade Kuwait? The war with Iran left Iraq with a weakened economy and big debts. Iraq owed money to its neighbor Kuwait. On August 2nd, 1990, Iraqi troops invaded Kuwait. They wanted to take over its rich oil fields. Saudi Arabia feared that Iraq might attack it too. If Iraq took over both Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, it would control nearly 40% of the world's oil. Because of this, it had great influence on the world. What caused the Persian Gulf War? The UN Security Council ordered Iraq to withdraw from Kuwait, but Iraq refused to leave. In January 1991, an international force began an air war against Iraq. Iraq responded by firing missiles on Saudi Arabia and Israel. Iraq soldiers did horrible things to people in Kuwait. They also took $1.6 billion from Kuwait. Iraq would not leave Kuwait without force. Soldiers from the United States, Great Britain, and France invaded. Troops from the Arab countries also joined the fight. After 100 hours of fighting, the Allies defeated Iraq and Kuwait was free. Historians call this conflict the Persian Gulf War. After the war, Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein remained in power. Two Iraqi groups, the Shiite Muslims and the Kurds, had also opposed him in the war. He began to make war on them and removed nearly 1.5 million Iraqi Kurds from their villages. Many died. What problems still remain in the Middle East? Some good things have happened for people in the Middle East. For example, oil industry have created new wealth. More people can now go to school and their health is better. But the distance between the rich and the poor seems to be growing. Families seem to be breaking down. Some people have become Islamic fundamentalists. They have returned to traditional religious values and have rejected much of modern life. In the United States, Christian fundamentalism is also growing. India has Hindu fundamentalists. Israel has Jewish fundamentalists, who sometimes challenge the government's authority. Alright guys, this is the end of Lesson 2. Next week we'll work on Lesson 3. Thank you. Have a great week.